Good morning and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridulwale. The headlines. Newly elected Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orbán, describes Ukrainian president and European Union bureaucrats as enemies, insists Hungary staying out of the war in Ukraine, just as Serbian President Alexander Vučić, also newly re-elected, says he would maintain friendly military relations with Russia. Ukrainian prosecutor general claims to have found 410 bodies in towns near Kiev, just as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres asks for independent probe. And Russian government to make more payments for international trade in its own currency as a major debt repayment comes due. We begin in Serbia, where its incumbent president, Alexander Vučić, was set to win the country's presidential vote with about 59.8% of the votes cast so far. Mr. Vučić acknowledged conflict in Ukraine impacted the campaign and said Serbians had no plans to deviate from its balancing game between a bid for EU membership and close ties with Russia and China. He said Serbia would maintain its policy of military neutrality and preserve friendly relations with Russia. Serbia is almost entirely dependent on Russian gas, while its army maintains ties with Russia's military. The Kremlin also supports Belgrade's opposition to the independence of Kosovo by blocking its membership of the United Nations. Meanwhile, Hungary's nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has won a fourth term by a landslide in the country's general elections, a near-complete set of results show. Preliminary results have showed that his right-wing Fidesz party had 53.1% of votes, with 98% of the total votes counted. In his victory speech, Mr. Orbán criticized Brussels bureaucrats and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, calling them opponents and causing war. In what he described as a huge victory, Mr. Orbán told jubilant supporters in the capital, Budapest, late on Sunday, that he could see it from the moon, but certainly from Brussels as well. Hungary shares a border with Ukraine and has taken in more than 500,000 refugees from that country so far. And Mr. Orbán has insisted by helping the people, but refusing to supply weapons to Ukraine, he is keeping Hungary out of the war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly criticized Mr. Orbán for these policies. When officially confirmed, Hungary's Electoral Commission, the victory will be Fidesz's fourth successive win since the year 2010. Mr. Orbán has had a fraught relationship with the European Union, which considers that Fidesz has undermined Hungary's democratic institutions, and in his 12 years in power, he has rewritten the constitution, filled the top courts with his appointees, and changed the electoral system to his party's advantage. The opposition complained that Fidesz had isolated Hungary from the European mainstream and from consensual democracy, fairness, and decency. Speaking of Hungary, let's talk to usually our London correspondent, but today she is in Budapest, talking about Juliana Olainka. Juliana, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Good morning from Budapest.
Well, I led into our discussion with that story about the political background to all of this, but you have been visiting with some of our compatriots who have found themselves not entirely willingly in Hungary as a result of what's going on in Ukraine. What have you found out about their situation in there?
Yes, good morning, Ladi. It's pretty interesting, actually, just hearing you outlay the ramifications of yesterday's electoral result. Obviously, Viktor Orbán, a leader of a nation where, if you look at the geography and the population, it's a pretty small country, Hungary. Yes, it borders Ukraine, but it has about 10 million people. The economics are not exactly where they should be, but his resounding victory as he mentioned in his speech is likely to worry Brussels. I think his opponent was going on the line that the war in Ukraine is a war against the West, which is what we've been hearing from G7 nations. But you haven't heard that from him, which is why this kind of trickles down into what we can expect in terms of treatment for our foreign students. Many of them are in Budapest. As you said, I've been spending a couple of days with them. Those that didn't want to go to the Polish border because they were hearing and seeing the results of what was happening with racist border guards. So they decided to come into Hungary. And in some parts, it's been good. You know, they've been fed, they've been housed. Organizations such as Nigerians in diaspora organization have been doing their utmost best. I know there have been a series of suggestions, allegations, rumors. Are Nigerians in the community doing enough? They are doing so much. The kind of work that they're doing, I can tell you now, having seen it firsthand, is not something somebody could pay you to do. You do it because you want to and you love people. But what happens now that Orban has got this resounding victory? A lot of people are unemployed here. A lot of people want to climb up the ladder on their own. Then third country nationals are second-class citizens.
Now, I'm happy you pointed that out, because a lot of those who have moved, as you said, left Ukraine and moved to Hungary and to Poland and all of that, encountered, some of them encountered fairly rough treatment at the borders. And as your report, which was on the program yesterday and on the news yesterday, did point out, there are quite a couple of questions unanswered, and for which the people, the Nigerians in Hungary, are worried. What's to happen for those of them who are students? What's to happen to their education? Are they going to be able to stay in Hungary indefinitely after the initial period of being, you know, temporarily displaced? What then happens, especially if the war goes on in Ukraine? What have they been telling you beyond being able to just find that, okay, we're not being bombed right here, but in terms of what then happens to them, what are they telling you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think this is what's really keeping them awake at night. You know, taking away all of the blame game and the accusations. We know that there are people on the ground. There's definitely people on the ground that are assisting them, making sure they have food, making sure they have shelter. But that's phase one. That's kind of, okay, chaos and panic, you're safe. Okay, what happens now? I think that's the huge issue. There appears to be a lack of very senior, high-level discourse taking place between, let's say, the African Union, let's say the Nigerian foreign ministry, and these G7 nations, these G20 nations that are offering refuge for Ukrainians. That's fine. 4 million have fled. They need somewhere to go. But what about those third country nationals? Why is this high-level discourse not taking place? It appears to be lacking. The students on the ground at the moment are relying on Good Samaritans. They are relying on organizations such as the Nigerians in Diaspora organization, which we know is voluntary. Where is that high-level discourse so that there is a central portal so that these students are able to be housed and fed elsewhere? There were 3 very young students, Laddie, because a lot of the students that we've been speaking to on Channels TV and in mainstream media are all mature students. There are very young students here. I'm talking 19, 20, 21. They're not able to articulate themselves carefully. They've told me that they are starting their studies already. They are starting their studies already. So they're sleeping on floors, on mattresses, on their mobile phones. They are resuming 4th-year medical courses. It's absolutely ridiculous. But bearing in mind, and this is really important, sorry, I know it's taking a lot of time here, but these Ukrainian institutions are heavily dependent upon this money from the foreign students. They're not releasing their transcripts. they are making sure that they join these classes, even though they're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and they are not allowing them to leave these courses to go to other universities. It's an absolute shambles, and we really need to make sure that we put a lot of pressure on high-level discourse so that countries such as Britain, America, Canada, Ireland can take on some of these students. They have homes for Ukraine. What about homes for foreign students? It's really important. Our students here are really suffering.
Let me at this point call on my producer to play back some of the visuals that you sent us, and which I alluded to yesterday, showing some of those students. And in fact, the other thing, of course, that your report did show was that not all of them were students. There are those who have resided in Ukraine for a decade or more, who are professionals and all of that. And that was why one was quite happy when you tied it back to this issue of the Prime Minister winning a landslide fourth term in office. I mean, everyone in Europe knows that Viktor Orban has always stressed the issue of being anti-immigration, and particularly anti-immigration from outside the EU. So that, again, brings some pressure down on these third country students and professionals who have found themselves in Hungary. I want to just play back your report, Juliana, just for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk a bit more, because there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth.
6 weeks on from the beginning of the war, it's here in the streets of neighbouring countries like Hungary that carry the trauma of those who spent days fleeing from Vladimir Putin's bombs. The stories of the international students who fled Ukraine is a story of life-changing dreams dashed in an instant, and dashed in the most devastating and cruel way. Dr. Oluwaseun Newton, a 30-year-old medical graduate, had lived in Kharkiv for almost a decade.
On Saturday night, I think that was the worst of it. It was bad. It was really bad. And I was like, God, just get us out of here. That was just the only thing. For like maybe 8-9 hours constantly, we could hear the bombings, and the buildings was shaking literally. And I don't know if you could... I had shivers. I couldn't even sleep. I was just shaking. I couldn't cry because I was like, Sean, you can't even afford to cry now. Just hold your tears in and pray for safety.
Nigerian community leader Daniel Mugiada is a medicine graduate from Kharkiv National University.
It's like you travel and you want to go home, but you can't because there's no home. So for most of us, that's how it feels like. It feels like we are on a journey home that we have not gotten home.
Here in Budapest, Nigerians in Diaspora Organisation, or NIDO, has become a lifeline for Nigerians. What's the reality of this situation?
Honestly, it's a very terrible one, because when you look at these children, when they speak to you, you understand that they speak like kids without hope. They don't know when the war will stop. They don't know when they are going to go back to school. Even if the war ends today, it needs time for them to rebuild. So they also here with frustration. They don't know if they are going to kick them out, if they're going to send them to like immigration camp to stay. So for me, leaving my business, my family to be here, it's not that I love doing it, but I have to do it. Especially when you see them, you see that when they are sick, they don't know even the hospitals how to speak Hungarian language, how to get a taxi, how to get food. So it's very difficult for you to just look and pass without trying to help them.
Now that phase 1 has come to an end, what next for those who have fled?
It has really traumatized us, most especially us that are close to graduating, and we don't know the way forward from there, because like what's going to happen? I'm almost done with my 6 years medical school. Am I going to start again from the beginning, or will I be able to transfer to another place? Those are the decisions, and those are the questions that are running in my head.
In most parts, the Hungarian citizens have been assisting with the refugees and our foreign students. But the landlocked nation has its own socio-economic issues. How long are they going to be able to assist? Juliana Olayinka, reporting for Channels TV News in Hungary.
Well, Juliana still is in Hungary. And Juliana, quite a number of things raised by that report, which you filed from Budapest yesterday. The other thing now is going forward, and you talked about high-level talks, and we've already mentioned that side by side all of this was the election whose results have produced the incumbent on a landslide returning. Did the students or the professionals, the Nigerians there, did they mention anything about having authorities at any level, the Nigerian embassy and so on, the Nigerian government, the foreign ministry, being in touch with them at any point in time to tell them, you know, the matters are being looked into or what exactly is going to happen to them when things probably settle a bit?
Sorry, Laddie, this is live television. I'm live on TV. Thank you. So I do apologise for that. Well, to go back to the election, I think on the whole, as I said when I'm wrapping up my report, it does appear that Hungarian locals have been very hospitable. There are so many good Samaritans. There are so many interviews, as I discussed, because I was calling you constantly throughout the weekend. So many people I couldn't put in the report, foreign NGOs and not-for-profit organisations that are working on the ground tirelessly to do as much as they can. And so there is some support, but it appears as if it stops short at just making sure they have somewhere to stay for a couple of weeks and they have a place to go to for food. What about the long-term safety and protection for these students? And again, we know that Viktor Orban is a populist leader. You know, look at what's happening in Britain at the moment with Partygate. As soon as the war started, Partygate went to the bottom of the agenda. And if you're going to do an election when there's a war in your neighbourhood, of course you're going to do that to reaffirm some of your sentiments. And he's been able to do that. So now that he has been reinstated, are the Hungarian community members going to be as accommodating to our foreign students as possible? And again, I think, you know, speaking to the students, they had nothing bad to say about the Nigerian government. And I mean that truly. And, you know, I'm not saying this to defend anybody. I'm saying this to relay exactly what I've been told on the ground. They are very grateful. Some of them were able to go back home. Many of them, of course, were not able to get on those evacuation flights. I don't think these students are in a situation where they're pointing the finger, you didn't help me, you didn't do me. They just want to know what is next. And perhaps the foreign ministry are engaging with G7 nations to try and assist our students, but we need to know this information. This information needs to be made clear so the foreign students are aware. There needs to be some sort of central portal. There doesn't seem to be a central place within Hungary or within Poland that is for African students where they have somebody that's telling them what to do. You can't rely on Twitter and Good Samaritan. So I'm wondering why this isn't taking place. This is very, very urgent. Also, we know, Laddie, that a lot of individuals exploit and manipulate people who are vulnerable. A lot of these young girls, and these girls were not featured in my report, they're very, very young. 19, 20, 21. You know, when the lights go down and they're here on their own, hopeless, we know what can potentially happen to them. So this is a crisis. This really is a crisis. And we really do need to step up, put a lot of pressure, particularly thank God Channels TV are doing their best with programs such as this and the program that we have much later in the afternoon to ensure that, yes, okay, we understand that this is a crisis situation, but what are we doing to help our students? They mentioned suicidal thoughts to me yesterday. They mentioned mental health. You could see that Dr. Shell Newton, even when she was reliving the 8 hours of constant bombing, it still frustrates her. If she hears a loud noise or a door close, it shakes her. There's a lot of issues on the ground that we need to resolve, but at least now we can put the blame game aside. We know that governments have done as much as they can in phase one. Now we're in phase two. Let's still try to assist our foreign students so it doesn't turn into a human trafficking situation, a violent situation, a situation where we'll look back and wish that, wow, we did something to support our young brothers and sisters.
All right, then, Juliana, indeed, you're right. Programs such as this emphasize the importance of continuous communication between all parties involved so that those students and other professionals who have found themselves nilly-willy in other countries can get the kind of help that they need to resume some sort of normalcy in their lives. But it's just about enough time for me to say thank you for your reporting, and do stay safe out there, being within shelling distance, bombing distance. Not easy, but do stay safe, and talk to you again soon.
Yes, thank you for picking my calls. Thank you, Laddie.
We'll take a break now, and when we come back, hundreds of Canadians are on a protest against the war in the Ukraine. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Ukraine's prosecutor general says Ukraine has found 410 bodies in towns near Kiev as part of an investigation into possible war crimes by Russia. But some witnesses are so traumatized by the ordeal that they are unable to speak. After Russia withdrew from some areas around Kiev, the mayor in Bucha, a liberated town 37 kilometers northwest of the capital, said that 300 residents had been killed by Russian forces while Chechen fighters controlled the area. Russia has denied the allegation that its troops killed civilians in Bucha, while Moscow says no residents suffered from any violence from Russian forces and accused Kiev of staging what it cast as a provocation confected for Western media. According to the prosecutor general, Ukrainian prosecutors were only able to enter the towns of Bucha, Irpin, and Hostomel for the first time yesterday, and they needed more time to work out the extent of the crimes. Meanwhile, the mayor of the recently liberated Ukrainian city accused Russian troops of deliberately killing civilians during the month-long occupation of his town, allegations that Russia's defense ministry has denied. Russia's defense ministry had issued a statement saying that all photographs and videos published by the Ukrainian authorities alleging crimes by Russian troops in Bucha were a provocation. Local officials say they have logged around 50 executions so far, dubbing it a genocide. At the weekend, journalists visited and the authorities began making allegations of atrocities, but it was a scene of shattered buildings and streets strewn with corpses. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that the West would impose a new package of sanctions on Russia over the killings of the civilians in Bucha and other Ukrainian cities, but he said that was not enough of a punishment. He insisted that hundreds of people had been killed in Bucha and other cities, including civilians who had been shot. Russia has denied these allegations that its troops killed anyone in Bucha. Bucha was captured in the days immediately after the February 24 invasion of Russian forces, which later swept south, capturing Chernobyl and moving towards the capital. But Bucha and the northern outskirts of nearby Irpin were the point at which the Russian advance from the northwest was halted after they met with fierce resistance from Ukrainian forces. The area had witnessed some of the bloodiest fighting of the war for the capital region until Russian forces had pulled back to regroup for battles in eastern Ukraine. Let's talk to Dr. Alan Ben-Meir. Dr. Ben-Meir, of course, is a professor, and he joins us from New York. Thank you for your time. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What do you make of all of this that has happened since this broke out? Now we're into the 7th week of what was supposed to be probably a week, 2-week special military operation. What's your reading of the situation?
Well, there are two classes of thoughts here. There are some suggest that Putin miscalculated on a number of fronts. He miscalculated the strength, the resistance of the Ukrainian. He miscalculated the speed by which the United States and its allies will get together. He miscalculated the speed by which they will impose sanctions. He miscalculated the strength of his own military. But there's another class of thought that suggests, well, he really did not miscalculate it that much. His idea, his plan is from the very beginning, is to control the east side of the country, retain Crimea, which are where they have huge deposits of oil and gas. And eventually, if he's able to secure that with a commitment on the part of the Ukraine to remain neutral, then that would be his ultimate objective. But certainly the war did not go the way he planned it. And whether or not this is his ultimate objective, he needs still now a way to get out of this. And I'm not sure that we know already, or we know what is going to happen in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, because he's sending all kind of contradictory signals. What's going to be next? So this is something that, in my view, is not going to end anytime soon. And we have also to remember that while he is presumably negotiating with the Ukrainians, he is continuing his assault on their various cities, so, reducing them to rebels. And in so doing, he's trying to exact as much concession as he possibly can. And that's another area that we are looking into. And of course, there's the continuation of whether he's regrouping, whether he's withdrawing from, for example, the city of Kiev. This is also being watched very carefully. So there are still some unknown that we are watching very carefully. And we'll see how that is going to evolve at this point.
Now, Dr. Ben, you are at the University Center for Global Affairs. That's the New York University's Center for Global Affairs. And you're also in the World Policy Institute. The question I want to ask you is that sometime last week, this time last week, as a matter of fact, some hope was raised when there were some positive noises coming from peace talks in Istanbul, Turkey at the time, possibly that some level of compromise might be reached because both sides could now see that there's a great deal of damage. But that was quickly replaced by continuing pessimism, and it looked like the war then subsequently intensified. Is it that both sides haven't had enough yet, in your view?
Well, I mean, certainly the Ukrainians have had more than enough. But I think this is a fairly calculated strategy on the part of Putin. He's negotiating on the one side while he's continuing his oppression on the other side. And in so doing, he's trying to secure as many concessions as possible. But I think this is one thing we have to remember here. And that is the Russian forces have suffered tremendous losses. The West certainly has been extremely helpful in providing the Ukraine with all kinds of weapons necessary for them to defend themselves. I think now we have an opportunity, that is the United States and the EU and some other countries, is to provide the Ukraine specifically with air defense system. This is going to be critical because obviously, Russian tanks are not withdrawing even from the surrounding of the Kiev and other cities, but they are bombarding, with missiles and with drones and artillery. So what you need is a significant air defense system. That has to be rushed. And I think if the Ukrainians will have enough of that, and of course additional weapons as that they need, I think that they can inflict much heavier damage, further damage on the Russian troops. And perhaps that is going to change Putin's attitude and try to finalize the conflict and get what he can get. As I stated earlier, basically his main goals, that is retaining the east side, retaining the Crimea, ensuring that the Ukraine remain neutral. But that process to be accelerated only if the pressure from the Ukraine, the support of the EU and the United States continued at a much faster speed. And that's what we need to see happening, to inflict as much damage on the Russian troops. And if we do so, I think we can bring this conflict probably to a quicker conclusion. But we're not talking about days, nevertheless. It may still take some weeks.
Well, the United States and the European Union, who you referenced as having provided some of the weapons with which Ukraine has put up stronger than expected resistance to the Russians, have refused up till now to do what the Ukrainians and probably others would think would be the game changer in all of this, which is to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine and possibly put boots on the ground within that country itself. You're in New York. The United States has refused to do this. Would you put that down to some extent to what is happening domestically and the fact that the U.S. is tired of getting involved, as they put it, in other people's wars?
No, I think this is part of it, but the much, much larger picture of that is, do we really want to have direct confrontation between the United States, that is the EU, NATO, and Russia? And that is something that needs to be avoided, in my view, at all costs. That is, no-fly zone could precipitate direct conflict between Russia and the United States and NATO. And we do not want, I mean, obviously nobody wants to think even in terms of what could happen in terms of potential use of nuclear weapons. But you know, Putin is playing this game. He's already put his nuclear arsenal on alert. And I don't think he intends to use it. But nevertheless, do we want to escalate when we still have significant of unknown what is going to happen? I think no-fly zone should not be on the agenda, but certainly providing, as I said earlier, effective air defense system. For example, what the Israelis have, the Iron Dome, similar kind of equipment that actually can down any projectile that comes from dozens and hundreds of miles for that matter. This is what they need. They need that quickly and large quantities in order to intercept these attacks from long distance and the destruction that's taken place in various cities. That's what we need. I'm still not in support of any fly zone, as I said, because this is going to immediately put both NATO and Russia into direct confrontation. And we don't want to see that happen under any circumstances, at least not at this juncture.
You're in New York. I make reference to that for a second time, and probably not too far from where you are would be the United Nations headquarters. Again, the United Nations appears to be sitting this one out, just as it has sat out very many consequential conflicts in the recent past, with very little to do, especially once it involves one of the big powers in world affairs. The question is, do you think that perhaps letting in the United Nations at this juncture to play the role of quote-unquote an impartial arbiter might prove to be a way forward?
No, not really, not really. I mean, the United Nations, in my view, have in many ways outlived its usefulness, specifically the Security Council. I mean, what you have there, you have a resolution, you have emergency meeting taking place in the United Nations Security Council, and they continue to debate wonderful speeches we hear about what's going on, the horrible way we're hearing about the destruction taking place and all of that. Members after members are speaking, but in the end, no resolution can pass on because Russia has a veto power. And this is the irony of all times. That is, what is in fact the usefulness of the United Nations Security Council when the culprit itself, that is in this case Russia, has a veto power and can exercise it. So the United Nations cannot really play any significant role in this regard. And that's what we see happening. In fact, they're not, because they cannot, in fact, have pass any resolution, let alone making sure that it can be implemented. That is, even if they succeed to pass. For example, the General Assembly overwhelmingly was against the invasion and condemned Russia. But that was just basically a show, rather than actual, what is the effect of that? Basically nothing. Russia couldn't continue to do what they wanted to do, regardless of what the international community have said, specifically when the discussion took place in the General Assembly. So as long as you don't have a body like United Nations Security Council that can in fact pass resolution and can in fact execute these resolutions, the United Nations becomes basically inoperable. It's not just working, It has outlived its usefulness in that regard. And the United Nations, perhaps after this experience, where they ought to think significantly and seriously in terms of how to modernize, how to bring the United Nations up to what's happening today. When it was created, there were only 46 states. Today they have nearly 200. Things have changed. Demographically, the world has changed. And so the United Nations Security Council does no longer reflect the composition of the international community. And that is a problem, of course, to be addressed at one point.
Dr. Alan Bent-Mayer, professor at New York University Center for Global Affairs and senior fellow at the World Policy Institute. Thank you so much for your perspective and for your time this morning.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Anytime.
United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres has asked for an independent butcher probe, saying he was deeply shocked by images of dead civilians in the Ukrainian town. Ukraine's Prosecutor General, as we reported earlier, said the bodies of 410 civilians had been recovered from areas in the wider Kiev region from which Russian forces withdrew. Moscow requests the United Nations Security Council convene to discuss what it called a provocation by Ukrainian radicals in Bucha. Russian forces have shelled Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv, killing and injuring a number of people. According to eyewitnesses, bodies could be seen lying on the pavement outside a residential building after rockets hit the area. Oksana Belichenko, a resident of Kharkiv and witness to the attack, said she heard a loud noise followed by an explosion. Its governor, Ole Sinyabov, identified the area of the shelling as Sloveditsky district in a message posted on Telegram. Reports say that shrapnel from munitions fired in the area left small round holes in nearby objects. However, that this had not been, in fact, independently verified. Carrying posters and flags, hundreds of Ukrainian Canadians and their supporters marched in Toronto to protest the Russian invasion as violence escalated over the weekend. The protests come as Ukraine accused Russian forces of carrying out a massacre in Bucha. Russia's defense ministry had denied those allegations, and Moscow had requested the UN Security Council to convene to discuss what it called a provocation. Protester Miroslav Zhendya says in light of the atrocities taking place in Ukraine, Canada should do more to facilitate the resettlement of refugees.
The climate changed the world, and you have the power to do it. Please ask now.
Well, the most important thing right now to help refugees coming into Canada was to help them with the support. You have to remember, these people are leaving without passports. They're being bombed. They're being terrorized. They're seeing their families killed right before their very eyes. These are civilians. They don't have their papers or documents. They need help to get to Canada. They need funding for that. They need support when they get here. Housing, employment. Counseling for the trauma that they've suffered.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says ruble payments will be used more in Russia's foreign trade. It comes after President Vladimir Putin's decree on new rules of natural gas trade with unfriendly countries and regions. Mr. Putin had said that foreign buyers of Russian natural gas must pay in rubles by Friday and by opening a Russian bank account or will risk having their existing contracts halted. Russia will extend its requirements of payments in rubles from gas to other exported goods as the credibility of the dollar and euro has been weakened by Western sanctions against Russia. That's according to the spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, in interviews on Russian media. So let's talk about this and other business stories. Laddie Williams joins me. Laddie, it's another bright and early Monday, and already the stories are rolling in. The Eurozone inflation has gone up.
Yeah, that's for March. It was expected, though, because we've seen energy prices soar at this point. So, and obviously we've seen how reliant Europe is on, Russian oil and gas. And analysts already, saw that this the number for March would actually go up. You know, we've seen that happen globally. Like in the U.S. also, we've seen inflation also, you know, tip up at this point. And it's, you know, making the central bankers actually think, you know what, it's time to hike rates again. And this is also, you know, tending and indicating that a recession, you know, there's already talk about recession, you know, at this point with rising inflation, because the central bankers have to fight, you know, this rising prices.
Absolutely.
We've seen cost of living soaring, you know, at this point because of this war. And this is something that was already going up before the war. So you can imagine, you know, it's gone up for March in Europe, and all eyes now on Europe. What's the next move? Are they going to hike rates even more? And we're seeing them also talking about, you know, trying to reduce reliance on Russian energy, and that's not going to cost them a lot.
That's going to take quite a bit.
It's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to cost them a lot of money.
Let's take a look at the commodities. Oil naturally would be of interest to us because of our own situation.
Exactly, yeah.
What's going on with that?
Yeah, so we've seen oil prices actually turned up this morning. It's about $105.20 for Brent. We've seen natural gas, you know, also up at this point. And all these are, you know, supply concerns is weighing on the market again, even though we've seen the U.S. actually release, you know, some strategic reserves at this point. We see the U.S. is trying hard to, you know, bring down the prices of,
because they're also feeling the pinch at the pump.
Exactly. So if the prices of oil could actually come down at this point, it's a way to win, you know, inflation, you know, try and, you know, bring it down, you know, to a reasonable level, because if oil keeps going up, energy costs is going to still rise, and that would still stoke inflation at this point. So we're seeing Joe Biden doing all he can, you know, to tame these prices. But with the, you know, with Russia still, you know, the biggest supplier at this point, supply concerns, supply concerns, and we know the sentiment traders in the oil market are going to use this, you know, to their advantage, and you know, the prices are going to keep going up for oil if these concerns, actually supply concerns, actually stay.
Russia is due to make a big payment
Massive
today.
Payment, yes.
About more than $2 billion.
Yes, $2 billion.
The last time you were here, we were talking about, what, $117, $118 million.
Yes.
But this is more than $2 billion.
This is a big
and
one.
This is coming just at the same time as Russia is saying, look, we're going to expand the use of ruble in our trade and all that.
Yeah.
As a result, the ruble has gained, almost going back to what it was before the war.
Exactly. So, you know, we're seeing this is countdown now. All eyes on, you know, this bond payment for today. $2 billion is for the coupon and principal payments. That's due, you know, today. And, you know, obviously we've seen analysts actually say that, you know what, this is a big one, and they're expecting a default. You know, but at the end of the day, we're seeing Russia say, you know what, we're going to pay in rubles. Well, the contract, the currency stipulates dollars, is dollar-denominated bonds. So it remains to be seen if they, because the bondholders obviously would be like, you know what, we had an agreement, you're supposed to pay us in dollars. You cannot all of a sudden, you know, say you want to pay us in a ruble. But it remains to be seen if, you know, because the sanctions are not supposed to affect their, you know, outflows for bond payments.
And they'd made payments before, giving orders.
Before, yeah. So I'm thinking, you know, it might actually go through, but it remains to be seen. We'll be watching, we'll be tracking, that one to see, you know, how the payments go. Before
we came on air, and I must just squeeze this in before we run out of time, Ukraine has raised more than $600,000 by selling what you referred to as non-fungible tokens.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people listening to this may not know, but I know this is your area of interest.
Exactly.
What is all this about? And is that what has helped Bitcoin to surpass $47,000?
Yeah, because now we're seeing Bitcoin actually, you know, rally. It started rallying about last week. We've seen, you know, hit new highs, the altcoins. The market is actually in neutral. It's been in extreme fear for, you know, a couple of months now, but the month of April is actually looking good, for the crypto market at this point, because we're seeing a lot of, attention moving into crypto. We've seen Ukraine, get some, they get the donations, through cryptocurrency. So with the NFTs now, the non-fungible tokens, it could be art, music, whatever it is, on the blockchain. And they are using this now to actually raise funds. That's Ukraine. They're selling pictures, of the war, how it's affected, their museums and, major landmarks, in their country. So what they're doing is, they're putting this on the blockchain, selling it. They sold about 1,000 units of them, and they've raised about $600,000. So they're going to use these monies to actually rebuild, what has been destroyed at this point. And we've seen, demand, a lot of
naturally go up because people want it.
Exactly, they want to own these NFTs because they're quite rare. Imagine owning such an NFT that you maybe there's just 5 units of it, and that could actually prop up the price. At the end of the day, they're hoping they can sell these NFTs. The buyers are hoping they can sell it for even more and make more money, in
when
the
things
future.
calm down.
When things calm
people
down.
now look back.
You look back and say, you know what? Remember what happened in Ukraine, when Russia invaded Ukraine. I have the NFT. It's worth so amount this time. And, you can always transfer, ownership and sell it and, make more money at this point. So
necessity being the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Ladi, thank you so much. There's quite a bit there for analysis, which you and Ini John McWell will be doing later on in the course of today, right after this show on Business Morning, and then subsequently on Business Incorporated. Thank you so much for the analysis. We'll take a break, and when we come back, our Odessa musicians are responding to the miseries that the war has brought. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Residents of the village of Yakloveka, which is about 30 kilometers from Kharkiv, have been recounting an attack by Russian forces which badly damaged many homes. The village has a population of about 600, and according to local media, it was bombed overnight on March the 3rd with around 40 homes damaged. Take a look at this.
Where homes once stood, there are now piles of rubble. This is Yakovlivka, a village home to about 600 people, around 19 miles from the Ukrainian northeastern city of Kharkiv. It was hit by Russian bombing exactly a month ago, leaving houses destroyed and craters in the ground. This local resident, Vera Babenko's house was damaged by the shelling. The 66-year-old said she was in the house when an attack occurred. She and her family ran out and hid under a cage when they heard aircraft flying ahead.
We were in the house. We ran out. We didn't hear the first hit, but when we heard the second and the third, we ran out. When we ran out, another was flying, so we hid under that cage.
A pile of rubble and a fridge is all that remains of her kitchen. Her son Yuri shows a crater caused by the explosion just yards from the building. Russia denies attacking civilians in what it says is a special military operation to demilitarize and denazify its southern neighbor. Ukraine and its Western allies say it's a baseless pretext for a war of aggression. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday the military situation in the east of the country remains difficult, warning that Russia was preparing for new strikes in Kharkiv and the Donbass region. But for now, residents in Yakovlivka are banding together to help rebuild what remains of their village. For Vera, she says the first thing to do is to rebuild her kitchen.
Let's take a look at updates in the sports world relating to the war in Ukraine. The International Olympic Committee has confirmed that more than $2 million has been set aside to help Ukraine's Olympic community. The money is being used to help athletes and their families that are in danger and to allow for training and attending sporting competitions to go ahead as best as possible under the current circumstances. The fund was started last month after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia at the end of February, and its main objective is to meet the immediate humanitarian needs of the Ukrainian elite and high-level athletes. Some of the money is being used for the evacuation of athletes, coaches, and family members from dangerous areas of military conflict. World boxing champion Alexander Usyk has revealed that his house was shot at and his neighbors were dragged away while he was defending Ukraine from Russia's invasion. Usyk was in London on February the 24th when Russian troops entered Ukrainian territory and faced an adverse return to his family in Kiev. He eventually made it back to his homeland and signed up with a territorial defense battalion, posing with a gun as he confirmed the news. The 35-year-old was training for a potential rematch with British fighter Anthony Joshua, having dethroned the unified heavyweight champion in September of last year. But those plans were put on hold as Usyk returned to Ukraine. But he has now said he will defend his title with a rematch likely to happen in the summer. Ukrainian champions Dynamo Kiev are to play friendlies against Europe's top sides, including Barcelona, PSG, and Inter Milan, as part of a 3-month tour to raise funds for victims of war in their country. The Ukrainian champions will also face Borussia Dortmund, Sporting Lisbon, Benfica, and Ajax during a tour between April and June in a bid to raise funds to aid those affected by the conflict. All friendly matches of Dynamo will be shown on Ukrainian and European TV channels. The project will also involve stars of Ukrainian arts who will support the charitable mission of the club. The domestic league in Ukraine has been suspended as a result of the conflict. Meanwhile, Dynamo Kiev manager Mircea Lucescu believes Scotland and Wales should step aside and allow Ukraine free qualification to the World Cup as a gesture of goodwill. Scotland are due to face the war-torn nation in June in the playoff semi-finals after the original date last month was postponed. The winners of the tie will face Wales in the final in Cardiff. Ukraine's players, managers, and Football Association president have all lined up to insist that they have no interest in football charity by being granted a bid to the finals in Qatar later this year. And the oldest working manager in world football, Kiev boss Lucescu, is now waiting with his demands. The 76-year-old Romanian says they have managed to bring 11 members of the squad to Romania, many of whom are in the national team. And just before we go, although the war is still raging on in Ukraine, in the southern port city of Odessa, musicians are responding to the miseries of war with their most powerful weapons, songs and dance. A microphone, a guitar, a piano, and a balcony are all the artists needed to fill the city's streets with their tunes as dozens of people gathered to listen to them. Accompanied by his guitar, singer Roman Kapitonov entertained his audience with Ukrainian songs, his passion obvious from his smile. The music fever also spread to the nearby market where dozens of people danced to a lively tune. Members of singer Victoria Shostak's family are stuck in Kherson and can't leave the city. But she feels helpless, but however wanted the show to go on. Having not performed in public for 2 months, she needed a quick check on her lyrics before stepping onto the balcony, taking a microphone and entertaining passers-by with her songs.
Today I play the music from the balcony, and for me it's a very important thing. I'm very happy that I can do this here, and I'm really happy that there are people for who I can sing, because you know it's not really a simple situation now. This is the war in Ukraine, but I think that here in Odessa we have to be strong enough to protect ourselves here, because we are the owners of this city.
This is my first time actually performing on the stage after the war started, and we're very happy to perform right now.
And so that musical note, even in the grimiest of circumstances, that we end this morning's program. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. There's an update at 5 later on today, but for now, do have yourselves a good Monday.